So this is a relatively new slide deck that I put together. So I've kind of done some DMR 101 that really more or less went 201 and 301. So they were a little advanced, and decided to dial things back. So I think for those who have spent any time with DMR, the code plug is probably the greatest point of greatest challenging point in terms of getting started with DMR. So I figured one of the best way to learn DMR is actually to build your own code plug. And so I'm become pretty emphatic about it. So I want to give you guys a little bit of a background of what DMR is, who uses it, walk you through a little use case so you can understand a little bit more about why DMR works the way that it does. And then we can dive right into code plugs. So keep this kind of open and interactive. So if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask, by all means, please feel free to do so. And just a little overview of what we're going to cover is a brief overview of DMR. And as I mentioned, we'll go over some of how DMR is used and a use case I think will help clear things up. Some of the basics of programming DMR code plugs. We're not taking a deep dive into each and every option, what's needed. And then if we have some time, I'll do a demo of how to build a code plug. Don't try this at home. What we're not going to cover is how do I pick the best DMR radio. We're not going to be talking about hotspots tonight. We could do that at another time. Or how repeaters work. And, there's lots and lots of buttons, lots of different options in DMR radios. We could spend days. So we're not going to do all that. We're going to start from the brass tacks. So DMR stands for Digital Mobile Radio. It fits into what is referred to as LMR or Land Mobile Radio. Really, any PTT communications fits into Land Mobile Radio category. But you'll typically hear LMR used when you hear about P25, DMR, NXDN, any of these commercial radio systems. DMR is a standard. So, as with most standards, there are vendor proprietary extensions, but at the core, DMR is indeed a standard. It leverages TDMA, which is time division multiple access. You look over here on the right-hand side, you'll see this little 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Basically, what happens is you have a 12.5K band or a channel that is logically grouped into two time slots, time slot 1, time slot 2. And the idea is that you can have two different people communicating at the same time. You could have one voice channel, one data channel, or communication going on simultaneously. Are they really transmitting simultaneously? No. They're chopped up into 30 millisecond time slices, but the reassembly of it is so quick that the human ear can't tell the difference. You also see it says FEC, so forward error correction is what FEC stands for. And FEC, forward error correction, is responsible for helping resolve some digital errors that may occur in transit. And so these radios have capability of healing. Again, supports 2 discrete communications. There are 3 different tiers in DMR. Tier 1 is really very basic, unit to unit, effectively Simplex. Tier 2 is what hams are using for the most part, and is really geared towards being a replacement for analog systems. You'll find that pretty much all of the commercial, I'm not aware of any commercial DMR repeaters that do not also support analog. And the reason for that is that a lot of organizations will buy DMR, but they want to move into it slowly. So they end up having effectively like a dual function system where they can gradually bring people over from analog to digital. Tier 3 is, if any of you are familiar with trunk radio systems, so Um, you know, frequency allocation is a precious commodity, and when you have a large number of users that need to share a system, you set up what's effectively called a trunk radio system, or TRS. The idea is that you have several different frequencies. You have a what's called a control channel, and that is literally a data channel. So when somebody keys up and they want to talk, their rings before like this. So, you know, the idea is when somebody keys up, that the radio is talking to a controller, and the controller determines what time slot is available, what frequency is available for that person to use at that point in time. And it makes very, very quick decisions and really allows people, organizations, to make very efficient use of a small number of frequencies and being able to support a large user base across them. The digital to analog conversion is done through an AMBI2+ vocoder, which is licensed technology that is owned by DVSI. You do have to be licensed or pay a royalty to DVSI to use an AMBI2+ vocoder. And as far as I'm aware, there's only one company that's allowed to use AMBI2 vocoder in software, and that is ICOM. They use AMBI2+ for D-Star, so it's not DMR only. AMBI2+ is also used in Sirius XM radio. It's used in a lot of different things. An organization called DMR Mark were the first to adapt DMR for ham radio use in around 2010. And it's the Motorola Amateur Radio Club is what Mark stands for. Very, very strong Motorola everything, radios, repeaters. You know, if you had anything that was not Motorola, it just you didn't get to play. Things have changed a lot since then. A lot of different manufacturers, but they all use they all standardize on DMR. The growth of DMR has just been explosive. So there are over 200,000 DMR ID numbers that have been issued. I think we're up to 206,000. There were about 120,000 when I started 4 years ago. And probably the two biggest reasons for that is you can get a DMR radio for under $100, and you can get a hotspot. So if you don't live in proximity of a DMR repeater, you want to get on the air, well, you can buy a hotspot, you can buy an inexpensive HT, and you can be on the air and you can talk to people around the world. So who uses DMR? You know, DMR was not built for hams. DMR was built for commercial entities, for public safety bus drivers in here, because my friend Eric, he is a big P25 fanatic, and he likes to tease me that DMR is a school bus radio. And yes, they really do use a DMR on school buses. I don't know why, but they do. But notice amateur radio is not listed there because it was not developed for ham use. So why is it not as easy to work with as D-Star? Well, it's because it wasn't made for hams. So you want to use it, kind of have to be willing to look at it from a different perspective. And that's where the hotel use case comes in. So think about an organization like a hotel that have a lot of different types of employees. They're all carrying around radios with them. They all need to be able to communicate with each other. But guess what? Room service doesn't need to hear what's going on at the front desk. Housekeeping doesn't need to hear the bellhop. Management probably needs to be able to talk to everybody. Security may need to be able to talk to everybody. But, you know, are you going to have 7 different radio systems, or are you going to have one radio system that can support all? Well, with DMR, you can have one radio system that supports all of these users. They can all carry around the same type of radio, programmed in to support the different talk groups. Person just takes they can just adjust the knob on the top of their radio to choose a different channel when they need to communicate with somebody else. But a talk group is effectively, think of it like a chat room on the radio, right? So anybody who is communicating with other people on the same talk group, they can all hear each other, but they can't hear other activity on a different talk group. Now, this is really just kind of a high level example, right? We're not getting down into the weeds of time slot 1, time slot 2. It's really to illustrate why we have talk groups and the fact that I can have 2 communications going on simultaneously. Is there a case that somebody may key up and one of the time slots is busy? Sure. Right. And that's where you start looking into going into trunk radio systems when you have lots of different people that are using the system simultaneously. But if you ran into a situation like that in the DMR world today with ham use, you'll just get like an error tone on your radio. You may see the LED on the top of the radio will flash, even though you're not hearing anything. And that's happening because of the fact that there's activity on the repeater, and it's likely on a different talk group. You'll also notice too that in DMR, a lot of radios don't even have a display on them. They don't have a keypad on them. These are the type of folks that they have a job to do, and it's not programming radios. And you really don't want them in the radio trying to change settings because they can do harm. And so that's really where. Let's see here, what's going on with my keyboard here. That's where the code plug comes in, is that all of the configuration, very few aspects of radio can be configured from the radio itself. Some radios expose more than others. You'll find that more of the real high-end commercial radios have very, very few settings that are available in the radio itself. And whoever controls the code plug can even disable those options to pretty much make sure that nobody goes in and makes changes. Is that very anti-ham? Sure, but these were not built for hams. They were built for a different type of user. We just have the ability to play with them. Questions? And you'll have to come off of mute, and when you're done, please go back on mute.
There's a question in chat. Says, are DMR talk groups in some ways similar to actual trunking?
No. So what trunking is effectively, let's say I've got 5 different frequency pairs, and so think of each frequency pair is designed to handle. Each frequency pair can support 1 repeater at a time, and each repeater can support 2 talk groups at a time. So if I've got 5 frequency pairs, I've got 10 talk groups effectively, and then a data channel that's kind of just hanging out there in the background. And what trunking is doing is when somebody keys up and says, I want to use talk group 5, the controller for the trunking system says this frequency and this time slot is available at this point in time, go use it. And the radio automatically switches. You don't even need to program in all of the different frequencies. The control channel actually provides all of that information to the radio. It's pretty amazing. So really the only frequency that the radio needs to know about is whatever frequency it is that it needs to talk to the controller on. And so really what trunking is doing is expanding beyond the boundaries of a single repeater, and the capabilities of just a single transmit receive pair. So it allows tremendous scaling. But I could key up, talk to the controller. I'm using talk group 5, happen to come in on time slot 1 on repeater A. When somebody goes to respond to me, they're also on talk group 5, but they may be going through repeater C on time slot 2. In trunking systems, you don't need to worry about any of that because the controller handles all of that intelligence, and the users definitely don't need to know about it. All you need to do is think of a talk group as a chat room. That's it. It's nothing more than that. Any other questions? Okay. So a code plug isn't just a file, it's actually a database. And the reason why I say that is because if you think about like a database, there's types, there's, like data sets, like, okay, I'm going to have a data set for my frequencies. I'm going to have a data set for contacts. And there's also going to be lots and lots of different features in these radios. And most of the time, when a new version of firmware comes out, it's not uncommon for manufacturers to release new features in a new version of firmware. So what you'll find is that the code plug, not only is there a version of firmware, but there's a version of the code plug as well. And so when you program a radio, you need to make sure that the CPS, or customer programming software, not code plug programming software, it's actually customer programming software, that the version of CPS that you're using is for the version of firmware that you have on the radio. And if you try and use a version of CPS for an older version of CPS with a code plug that's for newer firmware and meant for use with newer CPS, you probably won't even be able to open it. You'll actually probably get an error message. Some of the better software will actually tell you why. Some of the cheaper software will just be like, can't play. But it's very, very important to understand that this is why this is happening. Is there's new settings. The database needs to understand that there are new settings that it needs to store information about, and that's why there's such a tight dependency between the firmware and the code plug version. Where did the name code plug come from? Well, it was originally a piece of hardware that was used to program the radios. They would take it out of the radio, they would hook it up to a computer, or make changes with jumpers, and then plug it back into the radio. And there we go, right? That's and so the name stuck. It's really why we use code plug instead of programming file or something like that. Let's see here. So code plugs are hard. I would say, yeah. So they can be, but it also depends on how much of the radio you're really trying to take advantage of. Keep in mind, again, most settings are not exposed to the user. I mean, look at this this radio here. It's got what, 4 buttons on the front and a channel up and down and a volume and power, right? It doesn't have a whole lot of options available on the radio itself. All the configuration is in the code plug. But guess what? These radios have a lot of capabilities, and truth of the matter is that any system that is highly configurable and has a lot of features, there's going to be a higher degree of complexity. Some manufacturers are better at abstracting that complexity than others in their software and their products. I'm not getting into battles over one manufacturer over another. I will just say that there are some radios that are a lot better at it than others. There are manufacturers whose CPS software is just barely good enough to get the job done. And there's other radios out there that have CPS software that's far, far more elegant. There's one manufacturer in particular where you have to pay to play. You want their CPS software, you have to subscribe to it. And it's not inexpensive, but you also get technical support on it. You get new versions. There's a lot of benefits. Now, I like to use the term the 80-20 rule, and that's 80% of people use 20% of the functionality of most products. So, there's roughly 20% of the features in these radios is what you're going to rely on. The other 80% you may never use. I mean, heck, even my HF radios, there's tons of stuff that they're capable of doing, tons of options that I may never touch. They're there if I need them, but just don't. And one of my biggest things that points I want to emphasize is, if you don't know what it is and you don't know if you need it or not, don't touch it unless you feel like you want to experiment. and that's okay, but don't let it confuse you. Just kind of pretend it's not there. Irrespective of what manufacturer makes the radio, what software you're using to program the radio, keep in mind DMR is a standard. All radios have the same programming requirements. They all require contacts, channels, zones, right? And we're going to go through all of those, but they all have, at the base level, they all have the same programming requirements. So let's do some terminology, shall we? We use the term talk group, but in CodePlug, when in CPS, it's referred to as a contact. It's not referred to as a talk group. I'm sure there's some that do call it a talk group. None of the ones that I use do. They all call it contacts. There's three different types of contacts. There's a group call, that's our chat room scenario, a private call, which is a one-to-one, and then there's a special all call, which is one person to everybody on the system across all talk groups. So you may have the person who runs the radio system has permissions to use all call, and they may key up and say, we're taking the radio system down. Or there may be an emergency and everybody needs to be notified at once. Fire, get out of the building, or active shooter, heaven forbid, right? All call would be used for something like that. All call is not used in the ham radio world. Imagine if we all had access to all call, it would be complete chaos. Time slot. So we say DMR uses 12.5K. So you've got two logical 6.25 kilohertz channels. You can only use one talk group per time slot at any given point in time. And I say any given point in time. That doesn't mean that 5 seconds from now, I can't use a different talk group. I can. If somebody's not actively using the time slot, I can use a different talk group on that time slot, but I can only use one talk group per time slot at any given point in time. There's a term called color code in DMR, and the way to think of color code is it's effectively the equivalent of tone squelch in the analog repeater world. It's used, you have to program, you have to specify what the color code is. It's not an optional parameter, it's mandatory. But we don't rely on it that heavy in the ham worlds because groups like Sarah that are doing repeater coordination, they do a good job of making sure that there's no interference. But in other very highly dense populated areas, you may find that there are repeaters that are right on top of each other that are using the same frequency pairs. Well, color code will actually ensure that the repeater and the subscriber, what's a subscriber? It's the radio, the HT, the mobile device, but the repeater and the subscriber will not handshake. They won't even, you couldn't even key up the radio if the color code is invalid. A receive group. So a receive group is effectively telling the radio, I want to open the squelch up when I hear a particular talk group. By default, if you're using a channel that's configured for talk group 5, it's going to listen for talk group 5 no matter what. Receive groups are used in cases where you may want to listen out for activity on other talk groups without having to change channels. Do not use receive groups when you are first getting started with DMR. Please do not use them. They will create massive confusion for you. Wait until you're comfortable with them, with DMR, before you even venture into the receive group world. They will confuse the heck out of you, because what will happen is you will be talking on a talk group like Georgia statewide, and then you may hear activity on Atlanta Metro. One thing you'll notice when you're on DMR is somebody will say, hey, W4JEW monitoring Georgia statewide. Why am I saying what talk group I'm on? Because I know that there's a good chance somebody has a radio with a receive group configured in it, and they may hear my activity if they're on a channel that's for a completely different talk group. And unless somebody is staring at the display or looking at their computer and they have a browser window open to look at the repeater, the control, the bridge, they don't know. So you may key up, I may hear activity on Atlanta Metro, key up on Georgia and start talking back. Well, people are going to think I'm crazy because nobody reached out to me on the talk group I'm on in the first place. Do not use them until you really understand what they're for. Channels. A channel is really where everything comes together. It's our transmit and receive frequency, color code, time slot, contact. There's a whole bunch of other things. Do you need to worry about any of them? No. Keep it simple. You do not need to know what admit criteria is. So when you key up on DMR radios, there's actually a very small amount of data that's exchanged between the radio and the repeater before the squelch even opens, or before you're even allowed to handshake with the repeater. And one of these is admit criteria. One of the things that is enforced on a channel is what's called admit criteria. And that basically says, can I key up over top of somebody else who's already speaking or not? So sometimes you'll hear them called color code free or channel free. You may also hear polite or impolite. So it depends on the manufacturer. They're both referring to the same thing. It's admit criteria. Color code free is what we typically use in digital. Channel free or always is used whenever I program an analog channel in a DMR radio, because because you're not handshaking with a repeater in an analog world. It's just, you can key up at any time, so don't try and tell the radio not to. A scan list, pretty straightforward. I've got a group of channels. I want to scan through them until I hear some activity. Radio is going to stop when there's activity, but I may need to change the knob on the radio or choose a different channel when I want to talk to somebody on that channel. Roam lists. So, and some of this is just to educate you on what it is. Roam lists are not used in the ham world. People try and use them. They typically fail. The reason why is roam lists are effectively, let's say I've got 10 repeaters in Metro Atlanta area, same talk group on all 10 of those repeaters. I want the radio to use the repeater that has the strongest signal. So the radio is continuously monitoring the RSSI, the received signal strength, and it automatically selects the strongest signal. This only works with Motorola radios and Motorola repeaters, Hytera radios, Hytera repeaters. They also really only work when all of those repeaters are managed by the same organization or same admin. So you'll find that there are very few repeaters that are managed all by the same people, and they're typically not connected directly to each other through some sort of like a private network. They're all connected over the internet, and so this is why it doesn't work in the ham world. A zone is, you take a bunch of channels and you put them into a zone, and I think of a zone like a folder. I have a zone for Atlanta Radio Club repeater. I have a zone for Stone Mountain repeater. And in each of those zones, I have channels that know that each of the channels is for the same transmit and receive frequency, same color code, but different talk groups or different contacts for each of the different talk groups that those repeaters support. And then there's CPS, customer programming software, not code plug programming software. So, CPS is a must. And there's only one radio out there that you can get away without using CPS on, and that is a Radioddity GD77. There's a few different variations of it, but that Radioddity GD77 has to be running custom firmware called Open GD77, and it's firmware that was developed by hams, and it makes a DMR radio very ham friendly. It's pretty friggin' awesome, to be honest with you. If you can get your hands on a Radioddity GD77 and get Open GD77 loaded on it, It's actually very easy to do. You'll have a good, and the radios are under $100. So, and they're very easy to come by. KISS, keep it stupid simple. Start small and work up. When I got into DMR, the first thing I did was went online and tried to find a code plug that had the most stuff in it. Oh, this is awesome. Hundreds of channels, thousands of channels, every possible contact, every repeater in the Southeast. You how many of those I actually use? I don't know, maybe 10. The bigger the code plug is, the harder it is to maintain. These code plugs are really meant for small organizations. They're not meant to have thousands of contacts. Yes, they can hold them, but they weren't really designed for it. They get corrupted very easily. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Start small, and I will show you the differences between what I consider to be a manageable code plug and not. Make sure that you get the information that you need from an authoritative source. If I want to use the Atlanta Radio Club repeater, where's the best place to get that information from? AtlantaRadioClub.org, not Repeater Book or RFinder. Sure, they have information out there. Is it going to be the most up to date? Maybe. Best places to go is direct to the source. Model it out, pen and paper, spreadsheet, whatever you use. You want to count on your fingers and toes? That's fine. Model it out on paper. Don't try and do it in the software until you feel very confident about what you're doing. You know, develop a naming convention that works for you. When I show you one of my code plugs, you'll think it's. I mean, I would say they're very well organized, and I've worked on it for a very, very long time. I have a system that works for me. You may not like it. That's okay. You can make it your own. Implement version control. Let me show you guys something. Let me see if I can show you this. So maybe a little hard to see here. This is my radio programming data files folder. And in here, I've got all the different radios I either have or have had. I'm sorry?
You're not seeing it. We're still only seeing the
Oh, really? Hang on a second. Share screen. Oh, you know what? It's PowerPoint is doing that. Now? Yes?
We got a file list, yeah.
Okay, that's what I want you to see. So, a bunch of different folders here, and I apologize, it's really small, high resolution screen, but each of these is a different radio manufacturer. Drill in here. These are all the code plugs, same radio, okay? But they all have 4-digit date, 2-digit month, 2-digit day. And then sometimes I make multiple changes to the code plug in a single day. So in this case, on February 16th, I made 4 different changes to the code plug that day. I happen to have 2 DMR IDs. They don't really give out more than 1 anymore. But so I specify the DMR ID number, my call sign, you know, what features I have enabled. Is it meant for use with my hotspot or repeaters? And what radio is it for? You also notice too that eventually I get to some points too where I'll say I upgraded the radio. So now I know I need to use a version of software CPS that's going to work with that. And chances are really good I'm not going backwards in firmware, so I don't necessarily need to name all the newer ones. By the way, you go through 2020, here's all my 2020 ones for that radio, 2019, I keep them all. And how do I do that? The very first thing that I do anytime I open a code plug is go to File, Save As. I never make changes to the code plug that I open. I always save a new version because I can always go back. Do not get attached to your code plug, like emotionally attached to it. Be willing to start over. And the simpler you keep them in the beginning, the less heartache you'll have over starting over again. It will not be perfect the first time. I would say it took me a good 2 or 3 years before I got to a point where I found something that works for me, and I do not change it anymore. I've finally ironed out everything. But the funny thing is too, is my code plugs used to be pretty crazy and have lots of channels and contact. I use 2 talk groups. I use Georgia Statewide and Atlanta Metro, 2. I stopped adding all the other ones. That doesn't mean you shouldn't, but keep it small. Don't download somebody else's code plug. If you do that, you will be an appliance operator. Don't be an appliance operator, be a ham, build a code plug. If you go and you download somebody else's code plug, and that's your approach, and you don't want to learn this, I'm sorry, but I would say DMR is probably not for you. What are the building blocks? When you start out with a code plug, you can keep this in front of you. This will help you with everything that you need, just this one slide. Put in your name, your DMR ID number. There is something called talker alias, and we can talk about it later, but it's basically, you know, in D-Star, when you key up, somebody else sees your call sign, your name, and whatever value you put in after your call sign. They see that, they get it over the air. Very few DMR radios will actually do that. They only support transmitting the DMR ID number over the air by default. But talker alias is starting to show up in more and more radios. The way that people get around that is by downloading the radio ID database and installing it in their radios. I personally don't do that anymore. I used to. It's just a pain in the neck to maintain. When you start creating contacts, and contacts are talk groups, don't create more than 5 to start. Try 2 or 3. And then build your first channel. You set your transmit and receive frequency, what contact, color code, what time slot, admit criteria, timeout timer, TOT. I didn't talk about that one earlier. How long can you hold the key down before the radio stops you? Mine are all set to 180 seconds, 3 minutes, right? So some people set them for 60. When you're on DMR, you will hear some people say, hang on, reset. They'll unkey, they'll rekey, and they come back. Why? Because they know that they're getting ready to come up on the top of their timeout timer. That's the only reason why people are doing that. And then, as I said, receive groups, I've kind of got stars here. Highly unadvised for starters, introduces confusion. There's really only one valid use case for it in starting out, and that's if you have a hotspot. Some hotspots will give verbal indications as to what the status is of the hotspot. And if you want to be able to hear that, you can add a receive group with talk group ID 9 in it, and you will hear from the hotspot. It's not a big deal if you don't have it. You're not missing any shocking information. I promise you. Once you've got even a single channel has to go into a zone. It doesn't matter if you only have one channel, you have to have a zone. So create one, add all the channels to it. And then if you want to start mucking around with scan lists, you can, you don't need to. You can get away with just these first 4 columns. This first column is a one-time thing. Okay, you specify your name, your ID. Yeah, maybe if your call sign changes, you may go back here and touch that to update what it shows on the display. Questions, guys? I know it's a lot of information.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
I've got a question. Back on the, I guess, for my Anytone stuff, it has a thing that says TX permit.
That's your admit criteria.
Right. And it's got always channel free, different color code, and same color code. What's the difference between same color code and channel free?
So channel free, remember the example I gave a little bit earlier is you may have multiple repeaters in the same area with the same transmit and receive frequency, but they have different color codes. And that's really to keep people from stepping on each other. If somebody sets up channel free, It doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure that it means anytime somebody is transmitting and receiving on it at the frequency layer, transmit receive frequency. Doesn't matter if it's a particular time slot. Doesn't matter if it's a specific color code. It's just not going to allow the radio to transmit if you're using channel free. I don't ever use channel free. The only two I ever use are color code free and always.
Is color code free the same as same color code?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So it's kind of wonky because all the different manufacturers have different names.
Yes, but they're all talking about the same thing.
Okay. So you want same, I probably want same color code.
Yes, you want same color
99% of
code.
the cases.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep. And I saw somebody else here had their hand raised. Robert, WB4DHC. Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks for a really good, enlightening presentation. I'm on a search team here in Georgia and was looking at using DMR on Simplex. Is there some kind of special coding with the settings that you've been talking about so that any radio can talk to any radio on a Simplex frequency?
Absolutely. Yeah, there most certainly is. So, and I don't expect you to remember this. I'm just going to rattle it off, but I can send it out somehow later on. If you search for DMR Simplex in Google, you will find this information too. Everybody just has to have their radio. There's 4 UHF frequencies and 2 VHF frequencies that are effectively the calling channels in DMR. And everybody needs to use talk group ID 99, and the channels all need to be on time slot 1.
Okay, got it.
And in that case, you don't want to rely on color code free. You should probably use always in that case. That's a rare exception. But talk group 99, time slot 1, and color code 1. Truth of the matter is it really doesn't matter what you use as long as everybody is configured the same. In fact, let's say we're all in the vicinity of Atlanta Radio Club repeater, and I want to use, I don't know, talk group 99996. I'm just making something up. But that's not a talk group that the repeater is able to provide because of the bridge, the server that the repeater is connected to. Doesn't matter. The repeater is actually a very dumb device. All it cares about is that it hears a device that wants to use it, and if there's somebody else that's on that same repeater with the same settings, the repeater will forward the traffic. Will it consume a time slot? Yes, it will. So there's no getting around that. The repeaters, they have to both be, everybody's got to use the same talk group number and the same time slot, same color code number, because the color code needs to match on the repeater of the handhelds or the subscribers. As long as everything is common, the repeater will repeat it.
Thank you much.
Yep. Any other questions?
Hey, Jeff, it's Rob. Can you talk about the commonly used talk groups? Because you've been talking about talk groups examples as 1, 2, 5, but what are the real life talk groups that people would be using?
So let me hang on a second here. I'll make it bigger, I promise. So this is brandmeister.network. If you go under here, data visualization talk groups, this will give you a list of all the talk groups that are available on Brandmeister. There are 1,600 talk groups on Brandmeister. I like people to use talk groups that are for the area that they reside in. That's why I gave up on using all the other talk groups that I used to have programmed in my radio, and I use Georgia statewide and Atlanta Metro because those are the ones that I care about the most. There are actually 7 Georgia talk groups on Brandmeister. They don't all have the name Georgia spelled out this way. but most of them are not used. So how do you know which ones are used and which ones are not? This is really cool, and I didn't know about this about Brandmeister until I don't know, a year or so ago. But they actually display talk group statistics for this is aggregate, right? I mean, this is showing like 15,000 QSOs on 18,000 on this particular day across all talk groups. But if I want to know, if I know Georgia is 3113, let's see here, 3113. So I can filter down and I can see how much activity. Pay close attention to the number here because I could easily go and look at, 31131, and it looks like there's about the same amount of activity, but it varies. Can you tell which night the net is? Every Wednesday night, you see this big jump. But this will give you an idea of which ones have the most activity on it. If I go, so I said before, there's 7 different talk groups in Georgia. Let me go find one of the other ones. I wish they were alphabetical order. They're numerical order, but let's see here. Oh, I blazed past them. 311. Yeah, let's pick North Georgia, 31134. No, there's actually more activity on here than I'm used to seeing. 2, 6, right? Probably not a good place to hang out. Now, if you wanted to have a really long QSO with somebody, this would be a good place to go hang out because you're not going to interfere with others. But, a lot of these too, they have special interests. Like here's one for Disney, right? Maybe you like Mickey and Minnie and you want to talk about your trip to Magic Kingdom after COVID finally ends. You can go hang out on Disney. You may find that there's a net. There's one for AMSAT, Colorado HD. Oh, here we go. So Colorado HD 31088. These guys are awesome. They have a great net. Was it Monday nights or Tuesday nights? I forget. But these guys have a great net every week. Over time, you'll find where you want to hang out. There is a rule in DMR, and you'll find a lot of these have like a geographic element to them. So there's worldwide, there's North America. There are ones that are at the regional level, like Southeast, Georgia, Atlanta. Notice how I kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller in terms of the focus. Do not get on worldwide and yak on and on and on with one person or 2 people and make everybody in the world have to listen to you. Go find another talk group that's more regionalized and not used very much if you want to have a long QSO. You actually get yourself blocked if you do that too much and you don't follow that general rule. It started to happen a lot more. In fact, what you'll notice is when I was on the Georgia one, I thought we were being picked on in Georgia in particular because it said Georgia 10-minute limit. They all of the state talk groups have 10-minute limit in here, and there is an exception to it, and the exception is if there's a net. If you're going to talk with somebody for more than 10 minutes, the rule is go somewhere else. So establish communications with somebody, go somewhere else. If it's going to be 10 minutes or less, hang out hang out, that's fine.
Are the TAC 310 and such talk groups still being used for that?
TAC 310, yeah, TAC 310 is still around. What they did though was TAC 310 basically became like, CB channel 19 of DMR, breaker radio check crap. And so, which is actually, that's a valid point too, is which I'll talk about in a second, but you just had lots of people that were using TAC 310 for really, really long rag shoes. And why is that a problem? Well, because TAC 310 is kind of considered a worldwide talk group. And it's on a lot of repeaters. And when I key up on TAC 310 here in Atlanta, I am literally putting every repeater in the world that is actively on TAC 310. I am lighting up all of those repeaters, and I'm tying up the time slot on all of those repeaters. So if you think about it that way, you'll understand why these rules kind of why they exist. And it's a matter of being a good ham citizen to your fellow ham is really what it is. It's not to be an asshole. Now, people may treat you like one, and unfortunately, you will find that in the DMR world, there's a lot of very harsh personalities. Don't let them ruin your experience. There's lots of friendly people around. Come to the Georgia DMR net every Wednesday night, 8 o'clock. No question is too basic. No problem is something that we haven't been able to solve. Very friendly environment. I do not tolerate any of the harassment or stuff that I hear in other places that you get kicked out. I did have another point. The radio check. So there is a talk group called Parrot. Parrot is 9990, and it's actually a private call, 9990 private. When you want to make sure your radio is working and not have other people all around the world have to listen to you check your radio, use Parrot, because you can key up, you can talk into it, and when you unkey, your radio will repeat back to you what you just said. It's like a good parrot. Use Parrot to at least do basic testing. There's nothing wrong with going on and occasionally asking somebody how your audio sounds, but just don't make a habit of it. Anybody want to see how to program CodePlug real quick? Or are we going too long?
I'd love to see that.
Good answer. Good answer. So actually, before I program one, let me go give you an example of one to not do. All right, so file open, desktop. Hopefully I picked a good one here. So you probably can't hear it right now, but the fan on my computer is spinning around like crazy, and it's going to take a while to open because this file is massive as far as CodePlugs go. All right, this has, I don't know, almost 450 channels, and every state, it's got MERS, it's got GMRS channels in it, every possible repeater in North Georgia. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. It's great if you want to do this. I strongly advise against it. Chances are very, very good you will never use most of this, and that's exactly what I found, is that most of this I did not use. And if I need it, the file's on my computer. I carry a cable around with me if I know I'm going to be traveling somewhere. I can always load it on the radio if I need to, but it is not what I use every day. So we're going to do file new. Now, I love this. All data will be reset. Oh no, I'm going to lose my code plug. No, I'm not losing my code plug. That's just really poor translation of software written by somebody where English was not their first language. And I didn't lose anything. The file is still there. It's just opening a new file. What's the first thing I do? File, save as. And I'm going to just use that one so I don't have to type quite as much, but 2022-0106-01, oh, the 01 is already there. It's for Anytone 878, and I'll just call this one Jeff H code plug. All right, this is a brand new code plug. There is nothing in here. First thing that I'm going to do is go to radio ID list, and this is where I specify my DMR ID number. I know it by heart, 311-3156, and I apologize that this is so small. It's being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it and zoom in on it. But I only need one, right? I mean, I do have two DMR IDs. I can do 311-3397 H2. And then when I go and I program my channels, I can choose which of these DMR IDs I want that channel to use when I key up. That's a neat feature of Anytone that some other radios don't have. I cannot do this with my Motorola, but I can do it with a radio that's half the price. Price doesn't have any impact on capabilities. In fact, my recommendation, anytime somebody asks me what DMR radio to buy, this is it. Anytone AT 878 UV 2+. This radio is frigging awesome. It is a dual VFO, analog and DMR radio, and it's UHF and VHF. That's the other thing I forgot to mention. One other thing I forgot to mention. You will find most DMR repeaters are UHF, except for in 2 places in the country. In Massachusetts near Cape Cod and Northern California, all the DMR repeaters there have to be VHF. Does anybody know why? Except for Rob, you can't answer, because I think you know. Does pave pause sound familiar to anybody? A pave pause is a ballistic missile warning system run by the United States Air Force. If you ever watch DMR on a spectrum analyzer and compare it to something else, same frequency, DMR is very, very distinctive. It has this like real pulsing nature to it. It wreaks havoc with pave pause. So the FCC and military work together, and they outlawed using UHF DMR in those 2 places in the country because those where the 2 installations are. And you'll find you have to have a VHF DMR radio. You may find VHF DMR repeaters in other places in the country. I think Big Shanty Repeater Group has one here in Georgia, but most of them are UHF. Anyway, just a little trivia. All right, so I've got my ID number in here. What do we need next? We need a talk group. So there's always one in here. Let's do Georgia. It's a group call. So I've got group call, private call, all call. You'll notice too, if I select all call, it automatically populates the ID number. It's 16777-215 because that's the largest DMR ID number. It's reserved. And I'll read these out because I know that they're small. I'm sorry, they're small for me too. But this is going to be a group call, and I know the ID is 3113. Add. I'm going to add a second one here. This will be Atlanta Metro 31131. I'll add one more, and that's going to be Parrot. That will be a private call, 9990. That's it. I'm adding 3. This first one there, it was already there. No more. All right. Is there temptation to add more? Sure. But I'm resisting that urge because it will confuse me. Next place that we go is the channel. And I'll go up here to the top of the list. These are just in here by default. I'll clear them out and I'll just double click in number 1. And again, I will read out to you what I am doing as I'm doing it. So this will be ARC for Atlanta Radio Club, T2, because it's going to be time slot 2, Georgia, GA, state. Because I know on the Atlanta Radio Club repeater, Georgia statewide is on time slot 2. Remember I told you I have a naming convention? This is my naming convention. 3-letter abbreviation for the repeater, T1 or T2 if it's time slot 1 or time slot 2, and then what the name is of the talk group number, or the talk group that I want to use. And then it's 444.825, 449.825. You know, it's digital, high power, sure. TX permit. This is our admit criteria. Always channel free, different color code, same color code. We're going to use same color code. I could specify a scan list if I had defined one. I'm not going to bother. Contact, Georgia. Color code, Atlanta Radio Club repeater. I intentionally was a wise ass and I picked 10 because everybody else uses 1. I had to be different. So it's 10. Almost every other repeater, it'll be 1, not this one. I should have made it 11 for Spinal Tap fans, but very few people would get that one. So color code 10, time slot 2. There's a received group list here. Are we going to use that? Hell no. What else do I need? What else do I need? Nothing. That's it. Name, receive, transmit, power level, admit criteria, contact, color code, time slot. There's a whole bunch of other stuff here. Not touching any of it. Does it look interesting? Does it look like something I may want to play with? Sure. Come back and do it later. Get comfortable with DMR first.
Where was the contact in there? You know, where'd you specify the talk group?
They actually have a button here. And when you bring up the button, it brings up a list. And if I had more contacts in here, this would be very, very heavily populated. But each contact, so if I come back over here under contact talk group, there's 4 of them here. And when I go back into the channel and I click on here, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So when you look at a code plug and if you've got 1,000 contacts, you got to scroll through them until you see the one with the triangle, with the rectangle around it.
So the one with the rectangle, so the one that had the rectangle around it is the one that I had actually selected, because I had already selected something. So that's why you see it.
But if you have 1,000 groups and you look at it, you're going to have to find that.
That's right.
Angle.
Sounds like a pain in the ass, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why I say don't do it. That's the whole point, right? Now, actually, hang on a second. I can right click on this guy here. I can do a copy. I can right click on 2, and I can do a paste. You'll notice all it did was just add a number 1 to the end of the channel name. Everything else is exactly the same. Now I can go in here and I can edit it, and I can change the name from GA State to ATL Metro. And then all I have to do here is open up the contact, double click on Atlanta Metro, done. There's only one other thing I need to do. I need to create a zone. I need my folder. So my folder is ARC, it's Atlanta Radio Club Repeater Zone. And I'm just going to add both of the channels. If I did not add these channels to the zone and I wrote this code plug, I would not be able to select either of these channels. It would actually tell me I have nothing available to use at all. Channels are in the radio. They're there, but I can't select them because they're not in a zone. Can I add these channels to another zone? Yes, I could create, I could create another zone here. I'll just say, DEF, and I can put a channel from zone 1 into a different zone because I don't know, maybe I just want to group them a little bit differently. Maybe I want to have a zone that has Georgia statewide channel for every repeater in the Atlanta metropolitan area. I can do that. And I don't have to keep adding, I have to have a channel for each one, right? But I don't need to create multiple channels for the Atlanta Radio Club Georgia statewide just because I want to use it in more than one zone. I'm ready to write this to the radio. I don't have a radio connected, so I'm not going to, but I would just go to program, write to radio. Are you sure? Yes. Bam. How hard was that? Not too bad. Maybe a little confusing when you first start out. I can do it from memory because, well, I do it a lot. But if I have this here in front of me, and then I've got, these 2 pages of terminology, and then I go to atlantaradioclub.org, and I go to the repeaters page. Is that where you have it, Rob? I don't remember. Where do you keep? Oh, yeah. Okay. Here's the matrix. So I started this. Rob did an amazing job of cleaning this up. This thing seems really, really confusing until I teach you how to read it. And then you'll be like, holy crap, that's awesome. The repeater has 2 time slots, time slot 1, time slot 2. Everything to the left of this white box here is what's on time slot 1. Everything to the right is on time slot 2. And we have the same, each one of these columns is a talk group that's on there. Okay, and we just put the same number, same name and number above and below just for readability. But on either side, same information just for readability. Receive frequency, transmit frequency. There's a +5 split between them, color code 10. I know that it's time slot 1 for these channels, time slot 2 for these channels. I'll tell you about these 15s and ons here in a moment, but I can go ahead and I can program my radio based on this code plug. So I could add all of these numbers here as contacts and, create contacts for each one of these. Same transmit and receive frequency, same offset, same color code, everything else the same. Okay, and write a code plug. And this is bang up 100% accurate. Does every repeater have this? No, because they don't have Jeff Hochberg and Rob Satin building something like this. But most will get you pretty close to it. So this looks really crazy when you first open it up, but I mean, I think to me, somebody using DMR, after you spend a little bit of time with it, it will make sense. Let's just talk real quick about the 15 and the on. In DMR, there's a concept on repeaters of full-time versus PTT. PTT is not push to talk, it's part-time talk group. When a talk group is static on the repeater or full-time, that means anytime that there is activity on this talk group, the repeater will go into a transmit state. So if I have my radio on Georgia statewide, there's activity, I will hear it right away. If I have my radio on a channel for any of these other ones that are set to 15 minutes, if I want to be able to hear activity on there, I have to key my radio, just key it and unkey it. And then this talk group will become active on that repeater for 15 minutes. And if I don't use it once in that 15 minutes, it'll automatically disconnect. So that's the difference. That's what the distinction is here. And most repeaters are 15 minutes, some are 10. But for all intents and purposes, you will find that a lot of repeaters will have 1 or 2 that are static and a bunch of other talk groups that are all PTT talk groups. So that's why these indicators are here. And in fact, down at the bottom, it says red is always on, or yellow is a PTT timer. You could even take this matrix. I guess we could make it available to you in Excel format too. You could make your own for the other repeaters in your area. Heck, you could make them for the repeater owners and send it to them, become their best friend. But these things are great. So
I've got a comment.
Please.
Yeah, for the talk groups, because when you're using a repeater, you can't use every talk group that DMR has. You can only use the set of talk groups that repeater owner or the network the repeater owner is on allows you to use. So that's why we have a chart, because you can look at the Atlanta repeater and say, okay, what talk groups can I use? For instance, the Colorado has a very good net on 31088, the Colorado talk group on Tuesday nights. But the Atlanta repeater didn't have that, so you couldn't go through the Atlanta repeater to get to that talk group. And Jeff added it, but until he added it, you couldn't get to it. So if you've got a friend in New Jersey, for instance, and he says, hey, all of us, we're all meeting on the New Jersey talk group. Just get on the New Jersey. You won't be able to do that through the Atlanta repeater. So each repeater is different. So the Lawrenceville repeater or the Big Shanty repeater, they may let you do it. But you'd have to be able to, you have to be in transmit range. So that's why he was talking, I think, about this chart, is what you need to know for each repeater you're going to use is what talk groups it offers, just that the ones that you want are available. And yeah, this is a very
Yeah, that's
good way.
absolutely phenomenal point. I will qualify what you said though. So there are repeaters in the area that are on Brandmeister. By default, Brandmeister actually allows people to use any talk group they want. And you could have two different people using the same talk group on both time slots when a repeater is on Brandmeister. That's the default behavior. A lot of repeater owners will add in another computer that has something in between to control that, to make sure that people can't just use, somebody can't get on and talk to somebody in Bolivia on the Bolivia talker. By default, if it was just a repeater connected directly to Brandmeister, there would be nothing to prevent me from doing that. I think that's the Wild West. I think it contributes to fragmentation. If you want to be able to do that, you think that that's not fair, why control me? Buy a hotspot. Because with the hotspot, you can do whatever you want. It's your own little repeater. But these are shared resources. They're meant to be used by multiple people, and like to play nice.
Yeah, that'd be another presentation on the
networking part of it. Yeah.
Hotspots, because the only thing there is, because we talk about using a repeater, you got your radio and you're hitting a repeater. And if you don't, an alternate way of doing it is, you're right, you buy this little thing called a hotspot and you set it up in your house or your car or wherever and let it talk to the internet, and your radio talks to it. And you get all the DMR functionality going through it. You don't need to worry about being near a real repeater. It does it for you. But again, that's a
yeah, it's a whole other ball of wax.
Yeah.
Cool thing is that northern Georgia over the past couple of years, I would say all over Georgia at this point, the number of repeaters in Georgia has exploded. There used to only be about like 5, 6, maybe 8 repeaters all over Georgia that were DMR. And if you didn't live close to one, you didn't have a hotspot, you didn't get to play. But
yeah, the ARC was the second club repeater.
Yep.
Right in the state, right behind the Alfred Stone Mountain DMR.
So yeah, it's your chances of being able to get to a DMR repeater are really good. And so before I talked about, I said I wouldn't talk about radios, but I lied, I did anyway. So Bridgecom systems, they're a big Anytone reseller, and so this is the HT that I recommend. Even if you bought this HT and decided DMR is not for me, it's a phenomenal analog radio. Oh, and it supports APRS too. So it supports Bluetooth. You could even use it in the car. If you have a Bluetooth enabled vehicle, you could use the audio in your car, and talk on your radio. There is a mobile version of this radio too. So it's the 578. Yeah, here we go. So same radio, just mobile form factor, and instead of 5 watts, it does 50. And I mean, I realize, these prices may be a little higher than what you're willing to invest to get started out, and I completely respect that. So I mentioned before the Radioddity GD77. $95. You can buy them on Amazon. And you can just use the stock firmware that's in there, or you can put the OpenGD77 on. And you don't even need to program a code plug with OpenGD77, believe it or not. You can get away without programming a code plug. You can select everything that you want from the front panel, but that's only because somebody took time and wrote firmware for it. By default, out of the box, it requires programming a code plug just like every other DMR radio.
Yeah, and one more thing is, we're a club and we help each other with things. That's the advantage of being in a club or associated with the club. So if you're trying to get your code plug set up, you're trying to get your DMR ready, you're trying to get anything set up, anything, put a message out on either on the Facebook group or on our groups.io email, and someone will most probably answer you. And as they always say, if there are 3 hams, you get 4 different answers. So you may get multiple answers, but we're all here to help each other out, especially with the code plugs. Code plugs, are challenging. Once you get it, you go, hey, this was easy. What's everybody else's problem? But until that happens, you're going to be having some questions about it. And again, talk to any of us and someone will try and help you. Again, that's the advantage of being in a club is we're here for each other.
And to Rob's point too, right? I mean, if some people find DMR programming easy, some people do not. Don't feel bad if it's hard for you. We recognize that it's okay. If you're interested in learning, that's cool. We'll help you. And again, I mean, the Georgia, you've got Atlanta Radio Club as a resource. There's the Georgia DMR net. Georgia DMR, we have a group on groups.io. There's also georgiadmr.net. I run this website. You can actually go to groups.io. I did build this. I'll plug it. If you guys use Telegram at all, I actually built, well, my friend Ben helped me with it really, but there's a channel for Atlanta Metro and one for Georgia statewide that if somebody were to key up on either one of these talk groups right now, you would actually see your name pop up here. So these are live updating channels, the information for them. Oh, I meant to put them up here. I will. They're on the groups.io for Georgia DMR. But yeah, so these are kind of handy too. So if you can't look at your computer, you can't look at your radio, but you've got your phone and you've got Telegram on it, you can get a live update of who's on.
Anyone else have any questions? Whatever you want to know, just pick something.
Yes, that form you were using, that Windows Sandbox, is that generic or does that come with a certain radio?
Oh, so Windows Sandbox is a Microsoft Windows feature. I just ran the installation software for the Anytone radio, and so what'll happen is I'll just say no here. But this is a virtual instance of Windows running on top of my Windows computer. As soon as I shut down, poof, it's gone. No data.
Oh.
So when I start Windows Sandbox up again, it's basically like a fresh new computer every time I start it up.
Comment. You're using Sandbox, just to protect your system from unknown software.
Correct.
But you don't have to do that. I've got a Windows 10 box.
Yep.
I don't have Sandbox, and I just call up the program. And if you want to know what grid that is, I guess you want to know specifically, what that one is. Right, as you said, it's a specific one for the radio for your Anytone, Jeff, or that's the Anytone?
Oh, yeah. So I mean, as far as the software that I was demoing with, that was the CPS software specifically for the Anytone radio. So
Okay.
that will only allow me to program that specific model Anytone. If I want to configure my Motorola radio, I need to run the Motorola CPS software. If I want to program a TYT radio, I need to have the software for that.
Yeah, what's going to happen is all of those are going to just need the information that you saw here. It may be in a different box. You know, the menu may be a little different, but it's channels, right? Contacts, channels, and zones. That's the same concept and the same numbers that you'd use on any radio. It's just, you know, where in their form you put it.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for running this. This has been good.
Excellent. Good. I'm glad. I mean, I hope this was helpful. I know there's some folks that are on here that I know firsthand. I've worked with probably about at least half a dozen to a dozen folks that are on here. They'll all tell you I love doing this. So, you know, guys, don't hesitate. Reach out as long as I have time. I am pretty busy, but I tend to make time for people wherever I possibly can. I love doing this. I want to see you guys be successful. So, but you know, try and use the groups, right? Use Georgia DMR, use Atlanta Radio Club, because I've trained a lot of people that are in both of the groups. So there's more than just me.
Yeah. And you did the Stone, you know, you presented the Stone Mountain Hamfest, and you may not know it, but you're going to be presenting at our Hamfest.
Yeah, I found that out today. Cat's out of the bag.
Excellent presentation, Jeff. That was really, really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was eye-opening. Thank you.
And we can always talk if you want another presentation on anything else DMR related, or anything, just, you know, put something on there or let me know, KF4UTY at Atlanta Radio Club. And we'll put together a presentation on, you know, you want to do hotspots, you know, you heard the term hotspots, and you want to hear that, we'll do that. Just let us know what you want, and we will do that.